Right. When you take an army, massacre the population, destroy your people and your country in order to seize power, we charge you with war crimes and crimes against humanity. We say the fact that you did not do it with tanks in the conquest of a city, but rather with hunger and poverty as the ruler, does not exempt you from that. We say that we would form a branch of the ICC. If OPES wants to split hair, we're willing to form a clone of the ICC, which deals with this issue. We say this debate is not about people that we really don't like possibly Reagan, but rather people like Maduro or Mugabe, who after having power for years, engage in a policy that actively, willfully, and demonstrably put the people in the worst possible situations, and we can prove it. Right? First, we're going to talk about how do the harms of these policies look, and why are they akin to war crimes. Second, we're going to talk about how this is something that is done actively, willfully, and is predictable, and the results are predictable beforehand by the people doing that. Is that a clarification?
Yes.
Yes.
Are there any defenses to this charge?
Yes, if only because when we put you in front of a court, you have defenses, right? We say that similar to the way that if you have committed a war crime and the ICC charges you, then you can mount a legal defense because that is how courts work. This seems to be intuitive even for dictators, right? So the damages of economic policy, and why are they as bad, at least as bad, if not worse, than war crimes? We say first on the field of human suffering. First of all, yes, there are quite a few dead people. But we say furthermore, you don't only harm them by killing them, you harm them at each step along the way by starving them to death in a prolonged and painful situation akin to the burning of fields that happened when engaging in war and trying to starve the enemy's population. We say you do this when your state is failing, as Venezuela does not have water, and they nationalize and forcibly take in water from the citizens in order to sustain the government and possibly divide some of this. We say that you displace populations because now you have mass exoduses out of areas where you don't have infrastructure, where you don't have food, where everything has already collapsed. We say that you do destroy infrastructure which are not maintained, which are being harmed as people start to loot and pillage in attempts to get anything in order to sustain themselves, and destroying basically the future. And we say finally on this is that you destroy the fabric of society itself, as families are forced to sell or even trade their kids for money, sexual favors, food, and whatnot in order for having any chance to survive. Then we say you cause violence. You cause violence between citizens against each other in riots over food, harming them. You cause violence against the government. The citizens try to get anything. At which point you send the army, you crack down on them, you engage in violence against the population, and at the best case, you incarcerate them at substandard conditions because you don't have the money to even form any semblance of a prison system. I take closely.
Dictators who are already intending the worst effects of economic policies are already tried in status quo. What difference does this court make versus human rights abuses that dictators do?
So, two things. First of all, I'm fairly certain that Maduro is not, even if you say dictators, let's say Maduro is not exactly a dictator. He is allegedly democratically elected. We say that the fact that he continuously being allegedly democratically elected, which we'll get to, does not exempt him from the willful destruction of his country. But here's what we mean by, on our point on how this is something that is active and willful and not something that they do by accident. We say, first of all, I'll start even with a point for you. First of all, they often change the constitution in order to make it harder to replace them. They fabricate elections in order to ensure these cases because they are afraid that even if they were democratically elected in the past, at this point, where they've reached that kind of starvation, that kind of hatred by the people, then them not being in power would literally mean their death, the death of their family, the death of their support, at which point they erode the democracy, turning them into dictators, and we don't see action people persecuting this, because this does not technically fall under war crime, because even though Will Jones won that round, we did not persecute crimes against democracy at the status quo. few more on that. We say they don't stop at the point in which they see these harms, right? When it begins, when Venezuela said that they fixed the currency and the economy collapsed, they didn't say, okay, we need to make some changes, we need to make some adjustments. No, they doubled down. And any attempt, and the worse it got, the more they doubled down on this, the more they actively continued in doing this. They explicitly say this is a policy. They refuse aid from international organizations who say, we will give you a ton of money, a ton of food, and a ton of aid, because the trade-off would be that you would have to reform your economy and change it. No, thank you. We say that some of them, in the case of, for example, Mugabe, who was clearly not considered, even though he was in power for over 30 years, because some of them even continue to live in lavish and corrupt lives as they continue to destroy this. In that we say it is clear that quite often they do it willfully and actively, which means that it is not just a case of accident or negligence. What is also predictable in the sense that they could know even before starting it, and the claim that I thought I was doing what is best for my country is not a legitimate one. We say, first of all, history exists, right? The fact that they actively engage in policies who clearly and autocratically have destroyed economies in the past, saying, no, but this would go well because this time I have oil, that is simply not a valid argument, if only because we say that they are at the very least of average intelligence and can make these simple deductions. Furthermore, we say they are constantly being warned against doing that, saying this will cause massive human rights problems within your state. This might even incur sanctions which will make the situation worse, at which point, even if the policy was just, this would still lead to bad outcomes, and they say, no, it'll be fine, we'll continue doing that. At which point we say, as the burden of evidence of all the harm that you've done to your people amount, as the warning signs have been ignored at every step, as you have continued to change your country in order to enforce this, we can prove it in court. We have a massive amount of evidence, and we should be able to charge you, even if you didn't do it with a candidate.
Thank you. Leader of opposition.
Opening government missed this debate, Speaker, because they tried to make this debate of dictators are bad and what be removed. And they just used this as a mechanism by which they wanted to displace them. The problems that they identify with Mugabe are probably more problems involving racism and massive seizure of land, which is not an economic policy, but rather was one of displacing people and stealing their stuff, which is, I think, a different question, and one that is probably distinct. To me, I think that what they in fact wanted to do was to suggest that we should remove dictators in general. And they say that they are the only ones who have adopted economic policies that are so obviously bad that should be created. I'm going to deal quickly with that question of whether we ought to try and displace all dictators. And then I'm going to talk about where this policy would otherwise be applied and why it is likely to be unjust in those circumstances. So on this first question about whether we ought to try and remove dictators, I think that this is a singularly horrific mechanism by which they would try and implement it. That's true for a couple of reasons. One, if you try and displace a dictator on the basis of an economic policy, especially if they have at least a facade of being legitimately elected, as they often try and characterize, it is incredibly likely this will mobilize people in support of that. They're likely to resent an institution that is created in Geneva as being the thing that is likely to strip away their leadership in a way that I think is uniquely harmful and problematic to them. What that means is you're likely to see much more resistance to the kinds of change they thought was important. But more than that, I think what they would just end up doing is one of two things. Either they can displace the entire leadership, at which point in time they are likely to create something of a power vacuum, or they can just remove the figurehead. And if the problem is one where the leader is one that is too powerful and can act in malicious ways, it seems likely to me that the person that replaces them would probably also come from their party and act in incredibly similar ways. So the mechanism they try and have to solve this problem is one that seems very slow and very weak. I would think that the better ways to try and handle dictators is, where possible, to try and find the most obvious, egregious violations they have committed and remove them on that basis. So, for example, you might try and go after people like Mugabe for the incredible racism he's encouraged and the genocide that he tries to create, rather than going after him for his economic policies. If your goal is to remove someone and you think that you can, it's probably easier to pick the most powerful mechanism rather than one that is likely to mobilize a significant portion of the population and their support. So, 2 more questions in this speech. First, I want to tell you why it's principally unjust, and I'm going to tell you why it prevents reform, but I'll take it away.
Yes, seeing that the ICC already prosecutes people post-fact and does not militarily intervene in countries, would you engage with the actual case we brought?
So the question I would have, right, is if the ICC only deals with things after the fact, what will this court do? Because if your proposal is that they will deal with them right away, I would ask the question of what does this court have that the ICC doesn't if they make it part of the same institution? Like, I'm not sure how they're going to get them to prosecute them in the way that they want to. Presumably, if you're a dictator, you won't cooperate with the economic uncertainty charge the same way you would cooperate with the genocide charge. So I just think there's a distinction there that they're trying to create. So, in terms of why I think it is principally unjust, the first observation that I would make here is I think that in many cases, what people are doing is choosing to make prioritizations that are not inherently immoral. I think it is important to recognize here that many of the choices that people are making are ones that they are trying to do to prevent problems that otherwise would have occurred. Even if you look at the instance of Mugabe, the reason he starts going through land seizures is to ensure that he can try and ensure that soldiers who are returning have be able to access the wages that they have been promised. That is, I think, a legitimate decision that people can try and make in a tricky situation. He's not sure if a coup is likely to occur, and so when he enacts economic policies that are disastrous, he does so in an attempt to try and set off a greater harm. That's a thing that I think is a legitimate thing that people can try and do. Policy creators usually are attempting to create an outcome that is one that is positive, and so it's not clear to me about why you should try and harm them for that. The fact that their attempts were failures, or disastrous failures, doesn't make the action inherently immoral, for the same reason that if I try and do CPR but mess it up, we similarly would oppose prosecution on that basis. Secondly, I think it is important to remember that economic policy is a singularly complex area, and one that people tend not to be able to understand or comprehend particularly well. What that means is the creator is often not the leader who they will try and make subject to these harms, but rather the party as a whole that has created this policy in the first place. And so the outcome then, I think, is that people are likely to be harming the wrong groups. In particular, since people often don't understand the full implications but have specific reliance on economic advisors in these kinds of questions. Secondly, I think it's important to understand that in a great many contexts, people are able to consent to these kinds of trade-offs that are occurring. So, in general, I think that when people are seizing power, they usually do so on the basis of trying to outline what the policies are likely to be. They're usually elected on that specific basis. I think it is telling that they only try and restrict this to dictators. It probably applies to a wider group of people. Narendra Modi is probably in that category as well. And so what I think is likely to say then is that people are able to consent to harms that will accrue to them. I think it is principally consistent to allow populations to determine policies and to make trade-offs, even ones that are incredibly hard. So in the Maduro instance they're trying to raise, I think it is legitimate for the population to choose to prioritize their identity of Venezuela as being a distinct socialist state, even if that involves rejecting US aid, even if it involves visiting harm on individuals. That's a trade-off that I think people are able to create, and so because people can consent to those kinds of outcomes, that means then that they should be allowed to be able to pursue them more so. Thirdly, I think it is important to understand that it is really hard to actually achieve this prosecution in the ways that they wanted them to. Because it's really hard to tell which bits of the government policies were the ones that create the outcome, as opposed to harms that accrue to a state, not because of the policy, but rather because of the surrounding situations. So, for what they have to do in order for this prosecution to be effective, it is to actually be able to make people understand what the alternative would have been, to evaluate that counterfactual, and then to prosecute on the basis of that counterfactual. The problem that I would see occurs there is what they have to do is create a very speculative world and try and track people against that. The problem here is that what they're incredibly likely to do is just end up trying to make their court make a determination on an economic question that I think people are not able to determine on a legitimate basis, but rather is likely to be significant disagreement about. In a context where disagreement exists, it seems illegitimate to prosecute people, because if someone relies on other advice, even with good intentions, they could end up in a position of specific harm. So I think it is unjust to prosecute people for those reasons. More than that though, I think it creates incredible practical harms and prevents reform. This is true for 2 reasons. The first one is the risk of prosecution. people in general are likely to be more cautious of adopting significant changes with regards to economic policies by virtue of the fact that they could be prosecuted on that basis. That means that people don't implement reforms when they should have. This is particularly true in times of stability, when you often need to make economic reforms to prevent future shocks. But if that creates harm, and that future shock is not seen, that then means that you just end up being prosecuted for a thing that you didn't do. More than that, it means it stymies people's ability to make those kinds of changes, because people have much more scope to try and blame the previous leader, and an active prosecution is occurring, which gives them the ability to avoid making harmful, but important, necessary reforms. Proud to oppose.
Thank you. We now welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
The main problem with OO is that we have an existing body called the ICC. The reason it's a problem for OO is because literally every one of the attacks referred from the OO is against the ICC in general, about how it disincentivizes dictators from doing good things, I guess. No, it disincentivizes them from doing bad things. This is what we claim. How can we judge them? We haven't been in their shoes. Maybe they had good intentions. I mean, sure, maybe, but that's why we have a court for. And usually when the destruction is that great, frankly, your intentions could not be of much importance. Not to have a specific rebuttal to OO's case, then we're going to talk about what would be the implications of that in the real world. But before that, rebuttal. So first of all, we get this question of how could they defend themselves in court? Like, I assume that you could say it actually wasn't them, that the destruction was caused by someone else, or they had really, really good reasons to believe it would work, or they could say that the situation is in fact not as bad as it's being portrayed. And we think that for every reasonable leader on the face of this earth, any one of those would probably be enough for them to get off the ICC. If the ICC decides to go mad with power, although we don't see that happening. Like, even on war crimes, we don't try that many people. Like, I believe less than 20 people have been tried for war crimes ever since the ICC was founded. So like, there's something like there will be a huge abuse of power because. But then we get from both from OO and NCO. But what's different than the current ICC? It's very simple. Current ICC does not judge on economical policies. They care about whether you send your army and how many people your army have killed. The problem is you can kill, sadly, just as many people and just as efficiently when all the army does, instead of shooting you with guns, is just taking away your property and leaving you to die. That is what we say is the problem. And like, if for some reason it is somehow under ICC's charter, okay, then we assume that it's not, and then we debate it because this is what we do with it. But then that's not the real case, because then, but many of those policies are not even economical policies. Like, nationalization is not necessarily an economical policy. A, that is kind of a weird claim to begin with, it's obviously, but B, it is not right today under the ICC as like a breach of human rights. We say, when it's done on a massive scale and the results are that horrific, it absolutely should. But then they say, but it would mobilize people like because they don't want those leaders to be like forcibly removed. So A, they are not forcibly removed. The ICC cannot, probably sadly, cannot forcibly remove any kind of leader. Like, if someone decides to like take that country by force and then extradite it, maybe, but like this is not the situation that we have. Secondly, as we said, it's usually post-fact, again, sadly, and thirdly we say, please notice this is what we have right now with the ICC. We don't see this massive package of dictators being removed from power, and then like there is a huge power vacuum. Like, it just doesn't happen as far as we are concerned in real life. But then say, what if they try to remove a greater harm? We say, you know what? Many times people commit war crimes and they say, it was to remove a greater harm. That specific part of the population was a huge threat to our country. They say, maybe they've done it to protect the identity of their country. This is literally what every war criminal in history ever said. Our unique our uniqueness of this country is that we have this religion or this ethnicity, and those who are meddling interferences that we had to remove, right? This is exactly what happens every time with war crimes. We don't accept it as a defense for war crimes. We don't see how that would be a defense applicable here. And if like this is somehow a defense, fine, claim it in court, right? Like we really don't see why that means that. Please notice what is there, what they defend, and this is important. They defend that no leader, no matter how much his economical policies are catastrophic, no matter how much damage he has done to his own people, should never be tried on that, because they don't want this mechanism to exist. And that, we say, is just obviously unjustified. Those are terrible people doing terrible things. What would be the actual effects of that? Before I move on, let's see. Yes.
Denying food is already a war crime. What are the policies you're talking about that aren't already caught by the ICC?
No, but that's the thing. If you are like forcibly starving the population, like you're denying them access to food, when you have food and you don't let them do it, that is, if you are the reason that no one has food to begin with, that is not something tried under the ICC. We say this is exactly what happens if you, for example, instigate a rebellion and then those rebels kill a lot of people, and then you say, oh, but it's not a war crime, I just instigated those people killing each other for food, right? This is not something that should be legitimate, and sadly, we say again, this is not covered by ICC Charter in any way, shape or form, and we've explained all. What would be the implications of that? So, first of all, and we say this is important, it's just about justice. This is a person who is a threat to humanity, who has wronged it on many levels, and frankly, he should be in jail just for that. This is the same rationale that we have for the ICC, please notice, regardless of any effects that the ICC have. But we were saying it is incredibly important because this is something that can now deny them from certain economic actions. How does that happen? Let's analyze it for a bit. Look, obviously, obviously already today there are some things that are bad economical policies. As you've analyzed, it is a known fact. You cannot add the a 5 zeros into your currency for the 5th time and not realize it. Okay? However, today they have no problem with it because they're saying, look, my economical policies, frankly, has no bearing on me. I can still go to any country in the world, and like people may not like me, but they wouldn't deny me access to that country. They obviously wouldn't extradite me if I go there. The mere fact that now you, and probably some people who are close to you, are now denied your ability to move to a lot of other countries is a massive harm that hurts their way of life. Now please notice, as we've already explained, those are leaders who care about their way of life. They are willing to preserve their feasts and luxury in spite of all the poverty going on around them. So we say this is something that is that was removed. But we were saying, look, the mere fact that we say sometimes those are indeed leaders who crumble, be it to inside forces or outside forces, right? Means that now you actually have a tool. Now, would we use it often? No, we don't often invade countries just for economical reasons. So say the mere fact that this sometimes is something that can happen means that we have some form of effective tool against those leaders doing those kinds of things. And we say, frankly, that is a lot better than the status quo we basically do.
Thank you. I think your position.
If you try and provide CPR to someone and you break their ribcage because you are unqualified, we would not prosecute you because we value that attempt, even though you took on the risk that it could go awry. This team only wanted to engage with people who were obviously already committing war crimes, i.e. burning down fields by their own analysis to intentionally starve the population. They didn't do anything on their side. We gave you reasonable mechanisms to suggest this would be expanded and would stop leaders acting in effectual ways in times of crisis. Let's look at the first question of, is this a war crime? As I allude to in my introduction and in my POI, a lot of these are war crimes. the example we get from the opposition is placing your people in a position of starvation where they would instigate a riot because they're starving. One, to be in that position, you would have to be intentionally starving them. For example, burning their fields down or stopping farmers from. Otherwise, farmers grow stuff. Like, what's to stop them from doing that? Either being in a position of civil war and grow. I can't believe I'm bringing crop analysis to this debate. Like, you just grow food and a country will tick on normally unless you just do something crazy to stop them from accessing that food. We would prosecute them in that way like we already do. So we thought that wouldn't be the case. But even if that wasn't true, this is obviously the worst way of doing this. And this is analysis that goes unresponded to. One, it is obviously the weakest attack to that government because, like they say, with the examples they use Maduro and Mugabe, they've committed racial hatred and incitement of violence. Why are you levying a disagreement with economic policy that people will rally around and defend, will cheapen the legacy of that dictator, as that was the thing the ICC pinged them on. The fact that they didn't have effective crop management strategies is something that is going to make them incredibly hard to do and easy for people to rally around a narrative, for example, of the West is just picking on this leader because they couldn't even find something to actually levy, and all the critiques they levied before must have been fake because they can only get in on freaking crop policy, which suggests that it's something that's going to be ineffective. The analysis we gave as to are you planning to remove that leader was I actually think that would be a better model for you guys, but now that you're not running that, I think it would be easier to suggest that there is a legacy that people will build around that dictator, and if you attack that legacy in the weakest way possible, you only reinforce the concurrent leadership that wants to stand in instead because you make the criticisms to that seem cheap and bad. We also suggest that this is probably going to be expanded more. We would note that this is an institution in Geneva that is largely run by the US and Western powers. They have the ability to appoint judges and things like that. The capacity to determine what is effective economic policy and what is economic policy that constitutes a war crime that could not have been avoided, and I would note the vagueness in this team's language, probably just suggest that you would prosecute every socialist state, because you would suggest the economic policy is something that is inherent to the war crimes that accrue there, and we think that would be incredibly unjust. That's why their response to Jacob's argument that it is legitimate, for example, for Venezuela to prioritize a nationalist sense of self over receiving US foreign aid was not just that's how genocides start. That was a legitimate prioritization of a government that countries are entitled to choose for themselves and should be protected. This side wanted to take that away. Now I'm going to look to whether this is an unjust policy, but before that, closing.
Is economic policy incredibly complex in a way that government officials themselves are not able to understand? Or are these trade-offs ones that populations fully consented to because they're so easy to understand, in which circumstance we shouldn't hold government officials responsible for them?
So obviously this is not intention. This is just people will consult on the basis because it is hard for one dude to come up with a policy to run an entire country, and you are also able to consent to broad swathes of policy. Like, for example, we would like to be socialist. Unfortunate that you're stuck with this model. Let's look firstly as to whether this is principally just. We tell you that these trade-offs are not inherently immoral, and I think this speaks to this POI. We say that these decisions are often made in times of great crisis. As this team alludes to, if you're in a position where your whole country is starving, it is probably not because, and you have, by random chance, not committed any war crimes, something probably terrible is happening that is beyond your control. We will point to things like a civil war that you probably just happen to be in the position of leadership for if you didn't happen to instigate or do anything wrong during that time in the Civil War. Or maybe perhaps there is a great financial crisis or a massive ecological disaster. I'm just trying to think of things that would stop all farmers growing food. That would stop that from happening. That means that leaders do have to make complex trade-offs, which you should consult on, as CG correctly noted, and which are complex to reconcile. Things like maybe there is not only a finite amount of resources and you have to find a way to distribute them in a way that is somehow equitable, but people will die is the unfortunate reality of that. We would say that it is probably not inherently immoral to make that trade-off, and that trade-off is difficult to make, and that leaders are worse off for not doing it and should not be inherently discharged with that. But also, we would say that leaders are entitled to make gambles in a way that they are with other policies without it always being bad. They tell us that the calamity is so big that the intention does not matter. We point to, for example, Modi deciding to reclaim the currency and that being a great success. It was equally likely, I think, that could have gone completely AWOL, but the intention for example, to rectify the massive corruption in that country is something notable that we should stand for, and that India is now far better off for making that policy, and so we should not put barriers in place, and we ought not to, just because sometimes the policies do not go always the way that people intend. We also bring you analysis that it is unfair to hold that particular leader to account because of all the consultative mechanisms that we say. But lastly, I think it is completely impossible to determine what is an effect of the actual policy and what is just the circumstances surrounding it. If you are in this bizarre foodless barren and you just happen to inherit that, that is not the fault of your policy. Probably nothing you were going to do is going to stop that, and it will be incredibly difficult for a court to determine that. They just say, oh, but you can raise defences. I would note this is a court in Geneva that is determining what is legitimate economic policy. That is something not like a war crime where you can look at numbers and statistics and motivations. This is something where you're making an objective measure where intentions do not matter. And that to me just gives a license for a very unfair application of this policy. Let's turn now to how this policy is going to play out. We tell you that firstly, that this is going to stop policies that need to happen from happening. We point to times of crisis, for example, where you need to make drastic steps, i.e. maybe changing your currency, for example, or doing something to prevent mass inflation or things like that, which could take your country, but are necessary to do so and carry risks because all policies carry risks. We would say that your country would be far worse off if leaders are afraid of doing that because they would be the ones held accountable. But secondly, we would say that in terms of future harm, you won't make those changes before those crises happen in the first place. And thirdly, and this is new, well, it's not an 8-minute speech, unfortunately, and I've said the wrong time for the third time in a row, but engagement with international institutions is incredibly important here. And if you're seen as something where the international community is willing to pick you up and prosecute you every time, you're unlikely to engage with the IMF and the World Bank. Speaker, we helped leaders make good policy and didn't punish them for trying, so proud to propose.
Thank you. Member of Government, please.
Our opening in this debate does very well to establish that the consequences of disastrous economic policy is mass loss of life and much suffering. Our extension will demonstrate why this policy, unique to all others, is able to radically reduce the instance of those dangerous policies being reduced, and in doing so, achieve the greater justice that our opening couldn't. Instead of just getting a trial and justice for victims, we get justice for all future victims by restricting their suffering. I'm going to do that down 2 lines. I'm going to begin by characterising the kinds of economic policies precisely that we think are likely to occur and be reduced by this debate, noticing that I think the opening half's characterisation of dictators who are explicitly taking all the money out of their economy is a little bit of a red herring in this debate. And then I'm going to go on to characterise why this fixes many of the problems with economic decision making at the moment. So firstly, onto this characterisation. The first thing that I want to talk about is that the opening opposition's entire win strategy in this debate is ignoring the word disastrous and assuming that it means something like risky or not great economic policy, right? Times of economic crisis, yes, demand risky policy that might have some blowback. There was a risk that Narendra Modi substituting out every instance of 20, whatever the thing is, or above, I was just in Malaysia. Realistically, that is risky economic policy that had some downside to it. That is not a disaster though. That does not lead to the consequences that our opening describes to you. And in fact, none of the problems the opposition can talk about, like the fact that you might not have perfect information to these sorts of things, or the population might be performing a valid trade-off, really makes the standard of a disaster that our opening talks about. I want to identify 3 cases in which economic policy absolutely can lead to that kind of disaster though. The first is when a country led by a democratic government has pursued short-term economic policy exclusively based on the leveraging of a huge amount of debt into the short term and the abuse of monetary policy. And the classic case study in this debate is Greece, a country that was enormously wealthy, had an extensive tourism industry, was part of the EU, and has absolutely ruined itself and created a circumstance of 45% unemployment. The second is when a country has allowed itself to fall into a system of constant corruption, and then government officials regularly claim in elections that they will fix that and consistently refuse to do it. In a way that does refute the principle of opening opposition, because the population did not consent to the existence of that corruption. They consistently vote for reformist governments who then immediately engage in it. And I think a pretty good set of case studies there would be the Philippines or Sri Lanka, chronically corrupt governments that do host elections. And thirdly, countries that cling onto ideologies as sort of like signaling mechanisms to foreign outsiders and in order to win internal party battles in a way that does not actually lead to the betterment of the country overall. And that's the nuance that is missed by our opening with their excellent example of Venezuela. The problem with Venezuela is that people are constantly trying to get promoted internally in the party for their own benefit, which means they try to be more socialist than other people, because that is the metric by which promotions are determined. Meanwhile, though, the country is starving because they can't admit that loss. The thing that I would say about all of these policies are, firstly, they are all relatively objective and the outcome is relatively obvious of them. There is no complexity, there's an obvious decision maker, there's somebody easy to blame, and they're all incredibly rational and relatively specific. And in doing so, that relatively large catalogue of the ways in which economic policy can go exactly wrong rebuts pretty much everything that opening opposition wants to talk about in this debate, identifies there is a clear class of problems that are easily remediable, easily understandable, and should be fixed by this policy. So why then is this the policy that is able to do this? I would notice, however, that having identified a characterization of a circumstance in which we should change economic policy, opening opposition out the gate gives up this debate when they admit that the fear of being taken to trial then means that you are less likely to pursue certain economic policies. Given that, and given that I've identified a large class of economic policies that you should stay the fuck away from, realistically, that is enough to get us across the line in that instance. Noticing that that tension was also noticed by our Deputy Prime Minister, I'm going to expand on that mechanism in a single moment. But before I do, actually I'll take it.
If it isn't short-term borrowing that's harmful and it is corruption, shouldn't internal mechanisms like crime prevention, where most corruption is a crime in states, be the ones that take place and not international systems?
I mean, that's potentially true, except of course often the systems in these countries themselves are corrupt, which like kind of is a chicken and egg problem, you know? It's like you're a corrupt country, so you establish a bureaucracy that then becomes corrupted, so it's not likely to be effective. That's one of the reasons that the international community is a useful circuit breaker there. In addition though, I guess it's just piling on, you know? You create additional incentives, another body that might be able to catch these things. One will fuck up, another one won't fuck up. Definitely no harm in that observation. First thing I want to talk about is information regarding economic policy. Opening opposition, as I point out in A Point of Information, has a ridiculous tension here. They both believe that populations consent to trade-offs, but that economic policy is too complex to meaningfully understand. We claim that the nature of complex economic policy is abused by malicious actors in states with bad incentives to push countries down the paths of like their own political popularity by creating short-term growth, or their own internal promotion by adhering to ideology, or their own enrichment through corruption. And the opaqueness of economic policy then means that the country can't properly function because the electorate, or even like more junior party members in non-democracies, are not able to make accurate assessments and are not able to function properly. Why do we fix that problem? The first thing to say is that our organisation is very likely to be respected. Firstly, in the sense that it's an international organisation, and international economic institutions are remarkably respected, in the sense that everybody recognises that the global economy is inherently quite interlinked, in a way that then means that people are willing to look to the expertise of global sort of outsiders. The second thing to say is that it has investigatory capacity, which means that it's going to be able to present an awful lot of information to people after the fact, which means that then you're able to be more persuasive there. The third thing to say is that it changes the incentives for internal party individuals. That is to say, previously you might have been pressured by your underlings to pursue bad economic policy. Now you can say, no guys, we might win the election, but I'm going to get arrested for that in the future, which then gives you a good excuse you can take to the party, or you can take to the electorate. And it's also something that the party might care about, because they don't want to lose their leader. But what that means is that prospectively, you're less likely to pursue this policy. But also, if you are tried in absentia after the fact, the respect that this court has means that this policy is unlikely to be tried again by apologists. Finally, on the disincentive, I've already outlined that opening opposition has conceded this entirely. But what I want to add in extension is that I think it's going to be very easy to get a lot of these leaders. Firstly, because they often flee to other areas, not knowing that what they did was going to be judged in this way in the future, because they're egomaniacs. And secondly, because it is likely that their own country gives them up. Because the circumstance in which this is most plausible is when the economic crisis precipitates a change in government, and then that change in government leads to a change in the degree of respect. We are able to save the lives of many people who would suffer because we have a pragmatic policy basis.
Thank you. Member of opposition, please.
Here.
Madam Speaker, in status quo, African states are already trying to opt out of the ICC because they think it is extremely punitive. Ladies and gentlemen, let's realize that courts and international systems are only as effective as if countries choose to opt into those systems, if countries choose to believe in the fairness of the standards imposed. Today, in extension, we won't be dealing with the legal and much of the legal jargon that was in the opening opposition and about dictators. What we will discuss on closing opposition is how we can institute better economic policies for countries that do economic mismanagement, and what we would contend is that this policy makes it easier for countries to opt out of the international community system, which leads to much more worse consequences, as I'll talk about later. Before that, a couple of responses. First, both government teams have never really told us what disastrous economic policies are. What they've done in today's debate is discuss disastrous effects, not inherently disastrous economic policies. What does this mean? This means that loaning, Madam Speaker, or loaning in the short term inherently is not a bad economic policy. Sometimes some countries, and I'll discuss this later in my argument, do this in order to invest in, say, building more infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen. The only harm we heard from closing government is that somehow this short-term borrowing will be corrupted by officials, which we point out in a point of information. This is already an internal crime within democratic systems that have check and balances, ladies and gentlemen. So we question, is short-term borrowing inherently something that is wrong universally? We don't think so. Because as I'll move on to this argument right now, ladies and gentlemen, the truth is we can only establish international courts to prosecute things like human rights because these are universally agreed principles, ladies and gentlemen. Universally agreed principles such as protecting the dignity and existence of human beings, ladies and gentlemen, and that the visceral impacts of which can be identified. Death, ladies and gentlemen, or massive human suffering, Madam Speaker. But the difference with economic management, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is a social science. It involves risks and making decisions about making multiple decisions. For example, as I told you, we can borrow money, ladies and gentlemen, in the short term, large amounts of money to build infrastructures such as trains, for example, or roads, which would potentially increase economic activity. But sometimes those investments don't necessarily lead to the outcomes that we want, which leads us to some form of debt, for example. Or another example is we followed the advice of consultants, such as the IMF and the World Bank, for example, to liberalize our economies. But that resulted, for example, in killing local industries, for example, ladies and gentlemen. So we aren't sure of the outcome of economic management policies that we follow, ladies and gentlemen. It might lead to growth, it might lead to some turmoil, ladies and gentlemen. The truth is, Madam Speaker, in order to really identify good economic management, ladies and gentlemen, we think that we cannot, in principle, establish a universal agreement of what good economic management is. That's the conclusion of that, firstly. But secondly, what is the outcome going to be worse on their side of the house? Because what happens as a consequence if we build this international court? One, if these countries are inherently corrupt as closing government describes, then they won't join the international court system or won't sign its agreements to begin with. So their policy is ineffective in influencing those governments. But second, if they do sign in, ladies and gentlemen, and they find that the system is unfair and punitive, Madam Speaker, they will become much more distant to the international system. And why is that bad? Because they find it that the international system doesn't respect their sovereignty to make risky decisions about their nation, ladies and gentlemen. Decisions that could lead to growth, ladies and gentlemen. The most important thing here is we want countries to participate and not opt out of the international system. What will happen as a consequence is that we will lose this influence over them because we aren't respecting their equal power in international relations, ladies and gentlemen. So what happens as a consequence is our influence, if we fail to influence them, they will go to institutions such as China, for example, and loan larger amounts of money and larger interest rates so that they can recover, ladies and gentlemen, the impacts of their poor economic policy before. Rather, in our side of the house, when there's no international court that is punitive, ladies and gentlemen, if they fail in economic management, they will want to go to our institutions, where we have rules, rules that will help them recover, ladies and gentlemen. And we think comparatively that's better because the people on the ground don't suffer in the short term, which was something never discussed in today's debate. What happens after we prosecute the leaders that have done this economic mismanagement? We say on our side of the house, they're taken care of because they exist in our institutions with kinder loans and help recovery. That's why Greece is an important example of today's debate. Because Greece, even if it economically mismanaged itself, ladies and gentlemen, still went back to the EU in order for it to be helped, in order for it to participate again in international systems. If they find that the international community is punitive, what would Greece have done? They would have sold their assets willy-nilly to probably China or other worse actors out there, ladies and gentlemen. So we say, in principle, this is already wrong, but secondly, the impacts lead to much worse outcomes for countries that are already handling or are already mismanaging their economy. Before I move on, opening.
Yes, the problem is not when you sometimes take loans, it is when you actively continue this despite the finite resources going to zero, despite the international community actively telling you this is wrong, and you don't give a shit what they say, and despite your people starving because nobody has money, and therefore does not grow crops.
If you look at history, Korea, for example, loaned multiple large short-term loans in the next 10 years and in the next decade, right? And opening government would classify that as an economic mismanagement because we're not sure of the returns and they're still continuing to loan to build more roads, to build more infrastructure systems. The economic miracle was realized after 20, 30 years. So this leads me to my second point. How do we define culpability in terms of economic mismanagement, ladies and gentlemen? For example, if I instituted a policy of increasing minimum wage, for example, in the past 30 years, and its impact of capital flight, where it resulted to lesser jobs, happens 30 years later, who is to blame for that economic mismanagement? Which is why we find it really difficult for opening government to crystal ball specifically where at which point the economy was mismanaged, because it is a confluence of many factors, ladies and gentlemen. So we would argue in closing opposition that it's much better, ladies and gentlemen, to stick to status quo, where we respect the ability of countries in terms of sovereignty to make economic decisions for themselves, and as an international community coexist to assist each other for economic growth. We're proud of this.
Well, the first thing to do is address what exactly disastrous might be and how it would work, how this call would work, because most of the closing opposition extension is premised on, I think, deliberate misunderstanding or relatively simple argumentation from our side. First, what is a bad policy? Maybe something like a debt crisis that occurs as a result of your deliberate use of shuffling around of money or misreport, like cooking the books so things happen in the Greece case or report you. Those sorts of things that trigger like a Euro-wide crisis of confidence would probably qualify for this policy. They say, well, would you prosecute a country for dealing with debt in principle? No, we would look at the consequences that occur. Like, we wouldn't look at the policy itself that led to that consequence. We would look at the consequence and work backwards from there. Much the way, for example, like debating tabs are ranked by wins first and then speaker scores, because inputs are less important and more subjective than the outputs. Look at the output and then come judgments from there so we don't have selection biases. But also, they say, well, which countries would opt in? Like, if some countries not opting in, there's possibly a question of like fiat that arises there. But even if that's not the case, 4 reasons that we think countries would. First, if you don't opt into a fairly minimal level of scrutiny over your policies, you start to look a little bit shifty. We think political actors have strong incentives to sign up to broad international agreements that will provide them with that scrutiny as a way to vouchsafe. And secondly, that's important because their question, like begging about debt, runs into problems because how do you borrow money? You require people to trust you to pay it back. This is a way that people would be able to vouch that they could be trusted to borrow. That is to say, countries would face higher borrowing costs compared to countries that did sign up to this policy. Third of all, we note that debt more broadly requires broad engagement with the international system, and we imagine that in the existence of this court, that most countries would have principal opposition or like limitations in trade agreements and so on, with dealing with countries who do not sign up to this. And fourth, note all those counter-arguments apply to China as well. China, more than ever, has strong interest in a durable and stable international system that follows rules. We think it is unlikely that countries will have a sort of black market by China in that circumstance. Second, policy making. Why do we think policy making is better? This is the extension we bring you, and I think the reason we win this debate, because if you can prove that this leads to a better policy in these countries, that is probably a thing that will get solve all the trust problems that arise in and of itself. So we think, and this is the mechanism Beach brings you, that there is a check on the perverse incentives that arise within political parties. Because many of the ways you can get promoted, and many of the ways you can persuade people to buy the thing you are selling before the consequences become clear, is precisely because you can trade on things like your charisma or on like this modelling that was done by a consultant you paid, all of the very things that closing opposition was in fact concerned about. We need to say that regardless of how persuasive you were before the thing happened, the consequences will matter and you will pay a price. And not only a political price will be subject to your capacity to weave a narrative to your domestic audience about that, but others will be watching what actually happens to that audience. That changes the incentives in crucial ways. Noting that opening opposition concedes this incentive by noting that the political leaders themselves are sensitive to this. We give you two original incentives. First, that leaders can make this argument to their bases, which does not require them to actually to establish that the members are wrong on a key question of ideology, which is an argument they often struggle to make. They can say, I wish it was so, but if there is even a small amount of doubt this will lead to a disastrous policy, we face electoral catastrophe because I will be prosecuted. That changes the context in which they make those arguments, and also political parties themselves are obviously closely identified with their leaders, especially with presidentialisation of other Westminster governments. In that circumstance, there's an intense incentive on parties to err on the side of caution. That's how you build trust, because economic policy is already understood by populations to occur in the international context. That is more intensely so after the global financial crisis and after the European debt crisis, and also because this court, in the event that prosecutions occur, will be bringing new facts to the table that will alter the perceptions of those things. Before I turn to the last area of the debate on legitimacy, let me take close.
If leaders exercise all forms of good planning in good faith, but resulted in disastrous effects, would you still try them in this court?
If an individual there were corruption mechanisms and everything in a country that meant that everything was above board, it is unlikely this would be brought before the court. If, after following all the seemingly correct policies, something disastrous still happened, the court should still prosecute them, and I'll prove that more in the last issue, before I move on to the opening.
The economists predicted that Modi's policies would create economic chaos. Given his actions would be the same if a disaster had occurred, why does he belong in jail in one context?
Because intentionality is not the only thing that matters, nor is predictability. That is the issue I'm addressing now. Opening government proves that disastrous economic policies are bad, they don't explain why we should value outcomes rather than intentions as opening opposition wants. Let's address that. We say the standard should be objectivity. That is what actually occurs in the aftermath of a policy. Open opposition notes that economic policy is complex, so it can be hard to establish an objective chain of causal events. Intentions are an even worse standard by that metric. Why would you look at the very complex and open-ended, subjective and dynamically changing intentions of a leader when you could look at the outcomes of what they did? That is a reason not to trust that standard. And of course, can be objective standards like what would a reasonable person have done in that context? And they can call evidence on what information they really have. Why should a leader be able to construct to themselves a narrative that occurs around a circumstance like that? Second thing, leaders are powerful, so they should be held to a higher standard. Opening oppositions, like boilerplate defense of intentions, are premised on criminal justice principles that are meant to protect citizens from the potential tyranny of a state. It is perverse to apply such strong protections to the men who, by definition, have presided over the implosion of an economy. That is why, the same standard you would use for an individual is not sufficient for a leader. We should have a higher bar to meet. Third, representativeness. They tell us that democracy, we should trust the people who voted. Democracy is not a suicide pact. If you find your economy imploded as a result of democratic choices, that is not sufficient to say that people actually knowingly voted for the reasons open opposition gave without uncertainty, complexity, and vulnerability of those populations. 4, they tell us that suppression, this will suppress good risk-taking, like in the case of Modi. If a leader rolls the dice and everyone consented and a disaster thought to be unlikely does in fact occur, we should still try them in court. First, so we can establish the facts. Note that leaders can construct narratives themselves around the circumstances that occur, that crisis occurred in. We should mitigate their power to dominate that narrative. Second, we should establish a precedent to prevent similar disasters. It's worth sacrificing experimentation for stability and confidence in the case of economics. And third, we should punish the harm that occurred because those deaths of starvation are worth the price of one leader who might be innocent by a civilian standard but is not by a political standard. We should go after leaders who caused this disaster, and that's why we propose.
Thank you. Opposition member.
Here.
I don't get why the objective metric for judging the actions of an individual is outcomes and not going and why we should discount intent. Because under that standard, we should be trying poor individuals who have succumbed into the life of drug trade because they have no other options. By the way, these individuals did not intend to commit that crime, but more likely than not, they created that outcome because of the circumstances that they were in. We say that the same thing can happen for these leaders as well. Because as Dan told you, more than just the idea that these people want to take risks, the economy is so complex such that policies are not only affected in the aftermath, but more importantly, the viability of policies are also affected by what happened in the past and what happened in the future that is also out of your control. Like for example, if China, for example, chooses to expand the global trade, right? The reason why that was able to really take off is not only because of the fact that China chose to open up its trade, but also because the world was also prepared for that particular opening of that trade. So the fact of the matter is, outcomes are not within the total control of the individual, and that's why we find it abhorrent for closing government to defend in this debate that you want to destroy the life of an individual, take him to court in an international body for an outcome that may not have been through his fault alone. So the first clash I want to deal with is the idea of justification. Because they said, coming from government bench, please sit down, I'll take it later, is that these are harms that are fueled by these policies, and to be fair to closing government, they started identifying short-term loans or signaling, which I think is good because it clarified the debate eventually, right? But the first thing I want to deal with is the idea that these people actively refuse warnings, right? The reason why we cannot accept this reasoning to put culpability in these individuals, because firstly, even warnings are debatable, Madam Speaker. If you take a look at a lot of the economic policies that happen across the world, economists have always disagreed on whether economic policies are viable. For example, in Brexit, you have a lot of economists that say that overwhelmingly this is going to destroy the British economy, but at the same time, you have British economists as well that are saying that it's going to be better for the Brexit is going to be better for the British economy. So in that case, you have to realize that there is no one sure way to go, such that we can say that the political decision of that particular leader was something that was bad, objectively speaking, right? So even the warnings, the rejection of warnings, Madam Speaker, should not be a standard in this debate. But more importantly, this idea that there's a short-term borrowing, the fact that it is wrong, we already told you that economists can say that there is of value, but more importantly, the idea of signaling or choosing political decisions, the argument coming from closing government is that people didn't consent to these outcomes anyway, which we reject, because the only reason why the signaling of socialism works is because the people want the outcome of socialism. They want to make sure that their policies are socialist as well. So we don't really think that it's wrong for people to follow their internal party politics, because their internal party politics is also fueled by their charisma, which is fueled by the choices of people. So what's the point? The point is, these leaders make choices also in the basis of the political viability of their choices, which means that firstly, it means that this could be backed up by science, by economists, but more importantly, it is also backed up by the people. But more importantly, what we told you coming from closing opposition that was never engaged with coming from closing government was the idea that more than just intent, the nature of economic policies dictate that there is uncertainty. You are unsure if it's going to turmoil, you are unsure if it is going to success, and we find that for you to prosecute an individual for an outcome that is not fully within their control is something that is abhorrent. It's the same principle as why we don't prosecute children, because the entirety of the consequences are not upon their burden alone. So this policy as a whole is unjustified. Before I move on, I'll take one from, did we take from?
Closing.
Okay, we'll take from closing.
Okay, cool. In a minority of circumstances, you don't know exact intent. In a large number of circumstances, you know perfectly what the intentions of those people were. They were selfish, they destroyed a country. Shouldn't we discourage that behaviour and own the trade-off between helping a lot of people versus maybe condemning one person?
That is exactly the perfect segue, because the next thing I was going to say is that, fine, we'll give it to opening opposition. I mean, they had a lot of arguments about justification. I think that the more important part of the debate is the outcomes that we create, because we're not sure if intent or the outcomes are really the best way of fixing it. But the point is, what we realized coming from closing opposition was that this economy is already really not working well. So the question of the debate really is, how do we rebuild economies, and more importantly, ensure that economies in the future participate in international systems? The reason why this is important is because a lot of these countries are mismanaged for a variety of reasons. Probably they have lack of resources as a result of colonialism, or probably these countries just don't have leaders that are well equipped. So it's very, very important that you continue participating in international systems, because that is when more credible institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, or even WTO are able to help and act changes and influence policies within these particular areas. What did we hear coming from government bench as to how they change the system, right? The idea coming from closing government is that you have a fear of trial which will force you to change the system. The first thing I want to ask is, how will the system change? Because notice that the reason why this particular policy was enacted to begin with, if it is true that it is objectively wrong, is because these leaders did not mind the long-term consequences of their action because of the short-term benefits, which means that the fear of trial is not going to work, because they will always have the short-term benefits of winning the election, and they will always discount this future obscure trial, which will only happen, by the way, if the West is interested in their country, just by the way, not always the circumstance. So the fear doesn't work. What works, and what we've seen that work, is not sanctions, Madam Speaker. More often than not, what worked are carrots, incentives, for example, subsidies, participation in the international community. And that's exactly what we brought you coming from closing opposition, which they never engaged with coming from closing government. We told you that in order to make sure that there is a sustainable economic policy in these areas, we need to ensure that we have an influence. And the problem with this policy is that you're creating a court that is hard to accept, because culpability cannot be decided on. Unlike the ICC, where individuals sign the Geneva Convention or sign conventions on rights, economics is something that's tricky, such that there is no international policy upon which we can base whether the economic policy was disastrous. So naturally, because it's a very arbitrary body, there is no incentive for individuals to opt into the system, and as a consequence, that means, or even if they opt in the future, they will go out, assuming fiat, right? The point is, if these individuals don't participate in the system, it is going to be harder for us to influence their policies. Now, we told you about China, right? And they said, well, there's always an incentive to enter into these rules. That's not the point, right? The point now is that there are largely alternatives out there, like new loaning agencies or new institutions that present as a better alternative compared to Western nations. So if we want to ensure that we have a hand in these policies, if we want to make sure that we can direct them towards a better economy, you can only do that coming from closing opposition. Thanks.
Thank you. Please cross the house and we'll go on the next Our real disagreement was about the rankings of the two closing teams and then the two opening teams. So we should, I'll have Marina speak after me, and you should also talk to us after. Opening gov. I think what happened in this debate is a lot of the times you invested heavily in discussing the consequences of the policy. So things like people starving, people dying, families being separated. And this is how you prove the human suffering bar, which then kind of became a proxy for the specific policies themselves that you were going to prosecute people for. So and you were like fairly challenged on this by opening up, right? They were like, if what has resulted in mass starvation or mass suffering was something of a war crime nature, like scorching people's fields and things like that, we already have the legal remedies for that. So the economic policies we are talking here about are a bit more subtle, and not and like they're alluded to but never really like explicitly mentioned in your speech, right? And then you analogize these things to war crimes. But the analogy is easy to make if we're comparing the effects, if we're comparing suffering people under bad economic policies and suffering people under war crimes. But the analogy, of course, needs to be proven in relation to the specific policies. So, and there were some discussions of like Maduro and nationalization, but at the same time you were like, no, nationalization isn't really a big part of this debate. So it's unclear what the specific policy is. At the same time, you were challenged on this by saying, when they said it might lead to paralysis on the part of his leaders or an inability to act decisively and make decisions that might have harmful consequences but are necessary, at which point you're like, no, because A, they can use that as a legal defense. That's true, although if you also want to claim deterrence, then perhaps there is some deterrence effect, right? And two, you said that you're going to apply this policy in only the most egregious of cases, which is a fair first articulation of the case, but then they go, we have no reason to believe that this is only going to be applied in the most egregious of cases, because technically this standard, which is a bit nebulous, can be expanded under more politically motivated circumstances and be applied to like other cases of like socialist policies and things like that. At which point you go, there is a trial, which is fair, but then again, the risk aversion that some governments might experience and the harms that ensue from that still stand, although this argument isn't also built as coherently as it could have been, right? So comparing OG and OO, like we felt, I felt especially that I was persuaded at the end of the day that this might result in behaviors of state leaders being modified not in the way you want. You want them to be cautious. They're saying they will be overly cautious, which is a dangerous thing. So opening up, I think it's fair for you to call them out on the absence of specific policies and say, look, if it's a war crime, obviously, we already prosecute that. In terms of your discussion now of how it's very hard to apply a black and white standard to economic policies because a lot of times these policies are not inherently moral. These trade-offs are being made in crisis situations where there are extenuating circumstances. A lot of times there's limited time to make these decisions. And sorry, you have to gamble as a leader, and failure is always a risk when you gamble. The example you gave is land seizure, which I think is fair in the context of Mugabe and the examples they were raising. And also like Venezuela, people want to be socialist. I think where closing does edge you out a bit here is, I think their discussion of economic tools that are more likely to be the test case for this debate. So things like irresponsible borrowing, quote unquote, or things like socialist policies that involve like excessive social spending and waste, or not taxing people as highly as you should. I think their analysis of these specific policies that are more likely to be what is prosecuted in this court. So the best case for their side was a bit more concrete. So that's one. Two, the discussion of how this leads states governments to be unwilling to invest in reforms, I think is very promising, but probably deserved like more airtime, especially when they were going, oh, but you're able to defend yourself legally anyway. You're not going to get convicted unless like we're able to establish that you have access to a full range of information and all of these things. So I'm not saying that's necessarily true or correct or very, very persuasive, but in light of that, being strongly alluded to in OG and then it comes out in CG, like why is it very likely anyway that it will lead to leaders being risk averse? And what concretely are the possible harms of this? Because they're like, if they're risk averse, maybe that's such a bad thing, it's okay. Like, what are the concrete harms of this? Like, could you identify like, specific policies that they might now hesitate to do? I think there might be something along the lines of the court being seen as politically motivated and socialist leaders being prosecuted. I think this was dropped and it was credited, but I feel like it needed to be built a bit more. That like, to me at least, that is largely the difference between O and CO in this debate. Like a lot of the lines that CEO took were quite reminiscent of the lines that OO took, but a lot of the case studies were a bit more compelling. So I'll discuss CEO in relation to OO, but also start bringing in CG here and some references to OG. So what CEO says is disastrous policies, and they do take you at the policies you suggest. There is no certainty that these policies are inherently disastrous. It depends on how these policies interact with so many other variables as well. So two leaders could be implementing the same disastrous policy, and the outcomes could be different in either scenario, in which case it wouldn't be inherently a bad thing, because economics is not an exact science, and even like the kind of borrowing they say you claim would happen could be with the intention of infrastructure development, and if that doesn't pan out for other reasons, it's unfair for this leader group. The Korea economic miracle example, where they kind of like defied conventional advice, I think was quite powerful. So we think that they illustrated that a bit more concretely than OO. I do think that the response, so I do think that a lot of what CG said still edges you out quite slightly. So CG goes, we have a clear, we can draw certain lines in economics. It's not as absolutely and completely relative as you say it is. Like, even on the example of borrowing, I think their analysis is a bit more nuanced. They were like, it's not just simply borrowing or short-term responsible borrowing. A lot of what you're saying about how a specific policy interacts with its environment, leaders have access to that information too. So it is possible to draw a line in the sand and say, in this specific situation, this kind of borrowing was pretty unacceptable. And it is possible to achieve economic consensus on specific really bad policies. And the danger, or like, sometimes even the people enacting them are aware that they're bad policies, but they're kind of like straitjacketed into enacting them because they have to one-up each other in terms of like signaling who is the most socialist. And even if like some people may want this, leaders are also in a position to construct the narratives and persuade the people that this is what they want. So it's like a loop that you only break by allowing the leader a way out, the leader being able to tell their party, we can't keep doing this because we can actually get prosecuted for this. And I do think this is quite close. This fight between the two teams is quite close, because some of your analysis about debt is also really persuasive. Then they come back and say, your way of thinking is quite dangerous because it provides cover to a lot of leaders who now can hide behind the shroud of economics is very complex, and we can never like say for sure whether any economic policy is okay or not, which will then basically it's like a blank check to do a lot of bad stuff. To which you answer, but actually no, because some of these things are actually already internal crimes anyway, the stuff you're worried about. To which they go, if that's the case, then there are some objective things, right? There are some objectively bad things. So what is the harm now of an international check on those things? So on two levels. First, the level of proving that sometimes we can make objective conclusions about economic policies. I think they're slightly more persuasive. But also, to some extent, you do concede that some of these behaviors are wrong and crimes even internally. Which then...
Excuse me, we are going to start this round in a few minutes.
Cool.
So please wrap.
Yes, I'm there. Which then leads us to the second part, where you say, all right, but then having an international instrument like makes countries disengage from the international community, like hang out with China instead, and feel like the international community is out to get them. And you need them to be buying you instead. I do think they provide some compelling responses to this as well, which is one, you don't want to, like, it takes a lot before a country disengages, because if you do, it becomes very hard for you to borrow later on. Because who's going to lend money to a country that's unwilling to hold itself to what seems like reasonable standards? You will appear shifty, which very few leaders are willing to risk. In terms of intentions and outcomes, I think teams may have been like misframing this in the debate or giving this a little bit more importance, when in fact some of the material under it might have been more important. So what do I mean? So they're like, it's fair to do this to leaders. We agree it's a higher bar than we do to most citizens, because you as leaders have access to good advice, you have the power to shape narrative. So it's not that you're necessarily taking instructions for your population, you're also like manufacturing their consent. Whereas I think a lot of your examples for intentions versus outcomes are just not intuitively persuasive. So like a poor person, by their logic, would also be forgiven for that because they talked about the power asymmetry, like leaders or like children would be forgiven that, right? So I don't think that was like a turning point for the round at this point. I think what the bulk of the clash in the closing half was, can we make conclusions about economics ever? And the level of engagement of these countries with the political system, with the court. All right. Can you just like tell me very quickly your thoughts? Yeah.
In terms of TOC, I thought for me what was difficult was it seemed like OG's case was a lot of principle, and you kind of limited your scope to the principle without explicitly telling us why you were doing that, which made it really difficult to weigh against some of the more practical harms that the op teams were bringing up. But I would have also appreciated the OG had played ball with some of the more principled argumentation instead of, I felt like more of a focus on, the deterrents to reform, et cetera, et cetera. So I just think, in terms of clarification and playing well with that, that would have been like the top half. And then on bottom half, I think the problem with the CGT was it was only in the GovWit that I got a sense of like how willing you were to prosecute these leaders, right? Because the top half conception it seemed to be like we're not going to prosecute that many. It's going to be a pretty high bar you need to prove intentionality and all that. So that really cuts against some of the effectiveness of the deterrents that you were talking about. So that was just like my.
I need to like do judge things, but